Africa is home to some of the world's richest natural resources. Sitting on a treasure trove of untapped potential, Africa has over 30% of the world's mineral reserves. No wonder Africa has been seen as the future of global supply chains.
But it's not just about the minerals. Africa's fertile land makes it the perfect place to cultivate a variety of crops, everything from cocoa, coffee and tea to cassava, maize and legumes. It's a market that feeds billions and offers huge growth potential for investors looking at the future of food security and agribusiness. By the way, my name is Hawa and I represent the western part of Africa.
And that's just the start. Africa's energy sector is rapidly evolving with abundant natural resources like solar, wind, and hydropower. The continent is positioned to become a global leader in renewable energy. Countries like South Africa, Egypt, and Kenya are already making significant strides towards energy independence and sustainability.
Don't even get me started about what makes Africans stand out. Of course, it's its people, the young, dynamic, and entrepreneurial spirit that is fueling the rise of technology and innovation. We are seeing incredible growth in sectors like fintech, e-commerce, and mobile technology. The continent's digital transformation is creating new opportunities for businesses and investors, and the pace is only accelerating.
Discussing trends, challenges, and opportunities available in Africa is what we discuss on Invest Africa Podcast.
Invest Africa Podcast.
You are Africans. We are Africans. Louder. We are Africans. Louder. We are Africans. Come on, Africans. Yeah. We are Africans. I can hear you. We are Africans. Louder. We are Africans. Come on, Africans.
So whether you are a seasoned investor or someone looking to explore the emerging markets, the Invest Africa podcast is here to help you navigate this exciting landscape. Join us as we take you on a journey to Africa's abundant resources, thriving industries, and the game-changing investments that are shaping the future of the continent.
The Invest Africa Podcast, shaping Africa's investment landscape.
Hello everyone, welcome back to another deep dive session on the Invest Africa Group podcast. I am Rak Abimbola. As always, I'm joined by the incredible Awa Adebite. Hi Awa.
Hi Mubarak, it's good to have you again. I hope you're feeling well.
I think I'm healthy now.
And hello to our listeners as well.
Alright, today we are stepping into one of the most politically charged, emotionally layered, and financially complex conversations shaping Africa's future. Okay, it is an intersection of money, emotion, and politics. So we're talking about climate money. Yeah? We said climate cash. Who's really benefiting from Africa's climate fund? Let me give a context. Everywhere you look, headline announce billions flowing into the continent. At COP28 in Dubai, at Pre-COP Summit in Nairobi, in World Bank climate briefings, in glossy CSR brochures, billions here, billions there. It is the biggest conversation of our time. But beneath the celebration lies a question Africa rarely gets to ask aloud. Of all the climate money meant for Africa, who is really benefiting?
And that's the heart of today's episode, because climate finance isn't just money, it's power. It decides whose farms survive drought, whose cities get protected from floods, whose startups get funded, whose forests are commodified for carbon credits, and who controls the technology behind the energy transition. Yet, when you trace the flow, something unsettling actually shows up. We see that the money comes into Africa, but it doesn't actually stay in Africa. Projects worth billions are funded for Africans, but controlled by foreign consultancies and executed by foreign contractors, even monitored by foreign auditors.
I mean, behind the speeches and pledges we see in many of these events, there's a very real tug of war between global institutions, promising support, and local innovators demanding agency. Between the high-level climate diplomacy of COP conferences and the on-the-ground realities of farmers, tech founders, and communities still waiting for projects to materialize. So we are in the midst of this conversation of who is really benefiting from Africa's climate funds, who is financing them, and who is benefiting from it. Why do we see billions of dollars donated to Africans, yet it does not really benefit Africans? So whether you're listening from Nairobi, Cape Town, Abuja, or Kigali, or most probably anywhere in the world, this episode will give you the numbers, the stories, the controversies, and as well the bigger picture behind Africa's climate money. Awa, you want to set the stage?
So let's set the stage here, right? Let's look at how the money actually flows. Let's follow, we talked about commitment and pledges, right? Let's follow the money now, basically. And I would like to start with big numbers. Global climate pledges made specifically for Africans between 2024 and 2025 were huge. And what we want to talk about now are not just guesses. They are publicly announced commitments from governments, from multilateral institutions, and global climate funds. And honestly, the figures look promising on papers, but we don't think it's that good in reality. At COP28 held in 2023 and just recently during the African Climate Summit in Nairobi last year, the world pledged unprecedented support for Africa's climate adaptation and renewable energy transitions. So here's the breakdown. I have some here, one Mubarak will take the rest. Firstly, $792 million were committed globally between 2024 and now for loss and damage. This is called loss and damage fund. But here's the twist. Only about 210 million is earmarked for African states. And even that sum is tied to strict approval conditions.
I mean, of $792 million to only 210, and let me shock you, of those 210, it has not even been disbursed yet. Some are still waiting project approval, some are still at the paperwork level, and it's quite disheartening to see that people come up with numbers. It is giving political statement where you say something outside, I did something behind the camera. Well, another pledge that also got the attention of the people will be that of Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program, worth about $12.5 billion. This flagship initiative, which was co-led by African Development Bank, AFDB, and Global Center on Adaptation. The unfortunate thing about this particular pledge was that less than 18% has actually been disbursed. Okay, less than 18% of the whole money has actually been disbursed. That is, we are talking about less than $2 billion has been disbursed for this Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program. Another one would be the Climate Smart Agriculture Funds of $4.2 billion, which was announced for smallholder farmers. But this money was designed for smallholder farmers, but it is quite unfortunate that it is being controlled by FAO, IFAD, and European development agencies. These are you now ask yourself, how is FAO, how are they smallholder farmers? But it is what it is. Yeah, this pattern we are seeing, we can see that the money exists, but it rarely arrives directly to African innovators. It really gets to African startups. We now see African renewable energy companies or African farmers, lack funds when there are money that has been designated for them. Instead, it flows through layers of international NGOs, foreign contractors, Western consulting firms, global implementation agencies, climate finance auditors in Europe, monitoring teams in North America. And by the time the funds really reach the local communities, sometimes we see less than 12 cents of every dollar left. So it's like a process. For every $1 allocated, for every time international partners, European monitors, auditors from North America, by the time they start, getting involved, less than 12% of each dollar later gets to the intended parties. And that's the reality.
That might sound like a myth, but it's not, right? Because these things we're saying, they're actually documented. The Climate Policy Initiative published a 2024 report showing that 84% of Africa's climate financing is externally controlled. Not externally funded, but externally controlled. And there's a huge difference. If someone funds a project, but you run it, you still have agency. But if someone funds and controls it, you are not a partner anymore. You're just a recipient.
Now, I know a lot of people will be asking why all of this matters, yeah? It's not about calling out donors. Okay, let's get that clear. And it's about asking the honest questions. Questions like, if Africa is the continent least responsible for global emissions, yet the most affected by climate disasters, why is it receiving the smallest shares of accessible, localized climate funds? That's the big question that we are asking on this particular episode.
Yeah, to add to that, we also want to ask, why are African innovators, agri-tech startups, solar mini-grid companies, green mobility founders, or forestation enterprises, right? Why are they struggling to raise even $2 million while an European consultancy can collect $40 million to design implementation frameworks for Africa? This balance is more than environmental but structural. So let's take it one step at a time. Let's look at foreign contractors versus local innovators, right? Because you hear a lot of Africans say, yes, the money comes in, but the money comes with instructions. So they don't even want to get to the level of accessing the money, right? And this is the most controversial part of African climate economy, the dominance of foreign contractors. Because when we say Africa received so billions of dollars for renewable energy or climate adaptation, what we don't say is who built the projects, who supplied the equipment, who handled the consultancy, M&E or verification, even reporting, who earned the profit margins. So these are some of the questions that we're going to be asking and we're going to be getting answers to.
Now, unfortunately, this is where the story gets uncomfortable. Because if you follow the paper trail, you will notice that Europe and North America still captures a huge portion of Africa's climate funds before a single tree is planted or a solar panel installed. Take the JETP framework in South Africa for an example. Yes, it's an $8.5 billion climate commitment, but more than half of the procurement contracts so far have gone to firms based in Germany, the Netherlands, France, the United States. But you ask yourself, what happens to local energy companies? They often get subcontracted only for installation labor. In fact, all they just do is reach out to local companies and tell them, provide so number of men and let them come and install. What happens to production in Africa? What happens to procuring in Africa? What happens to all these local energy companies being the one procuring themselves? It is what it is, though.
And you've seen the same thing in Senegal, right? The 2.7 billion JETP package included massive offshore wind plants, but the turbines, transmission infrastructure, the engineering designs all comes down from European companies. African innovators do the grunt work, while foreign contractors take the margin. And it's not because Africans lack the skills. That has already been declared. It's because climate finance is tied to conditions. Loans and grants often come with procurement strings. You want our money, right? Then you must use our technology. Or you want access to climate funds, then our audit firms must oversee the reporting, right? It's climate conditionality. And it's quite subtle, quite diplomatic, but deeply powerful in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, the same thing happens in reforestation, yeah. I think an African minister once said off record, I mean, I'm not allowed to mention names, but whenever you hear off records, yeah, they are valid information. He said, we hosted the forest, they hosted the meeting. Guess who took the money? I mean, that day, the conference, yeah, the press briefing, everyone burst into laughter because he said it jokingly that, oh, we hosted the forest, they hosted the meeting. Guess who took the money? Most large-scale forest projects, especially Red Plus initiatives, are designed and monitored by foreign environmental consultancies, earning tens of millions annually. Meanwhile, local communities tending the forest receive stipends, barely enough for school fees. Now, think about solar too. Solar panels imported from China, inverters imported from Germany, battery system from South Korea, engineers flown in for feasibility studies, even when the funding is meant for Africa. The value chain lives somewhere else. Globally, solar manufacturing is dominated by Asia. We get that. But Africa's own solar tech companies, from manufacturing small panels to building localized grid software, are rarely invited into the room. Yet we are designing for Africa. I mean, I don't know. It still does not make sense to me if you're asking me, though. Maybe Awa has a reason
what doesn't make sense to most?
Yeah, I was about to say that. Maybe you have a reason why local investors are sidelined. Maybe you've read a report or you've seen firsthand why local investors are always sidelined to this conversation.
Why it's a bit troubling is that recently we've been seeing a lot of advocacy, a lot of campaign for including local initiatives, right? Because they understand the needs of the people. But let's look at it honestly. The climate finance world is not designed around local innovators. And it's not because of lack of creativity. It's more of gatekeeping. There's complex proposal processes. The monitoring frameworks are too detailed, too sophisticated, too comprehensive. High cost feasibility studies, audit requirements that exceed the budget of African startups. So to apply for, some climate grants, you need a 5-year financial model. You need a global audit firm to, actually be attached to your work. You need letters of guarantee. You need feasibility studies costing hundreds of dollars. You need a comprehensive ESG reporting framework, which, let's look at it honestly, most African startups cannot afford that. And we are saying it plain here. Climate finance rewards bureaucracy, not innovation. A foreign consultancy with PowerPoint slides and a polished proposal will win the grants before a local startup that actually understands the terrain, and that's the fact.
The irony of this thing is that local innovators often deliver better results. I mean, that's a fact though. African agri-tech founders know the soil. African energy startups understand local grid instability. African water tech companies know why boreholes fails. African forest communities understand sacred trees and local ecology better than any satellite imaging. Yet they remain periphery. So, like you rightly said, climate financing rewards bureaucracy, not innovation. So I agree with you 100% on that.
And this just shows that there are numerous missed opportunities for African startups, right? Because if you zoom into the startup side, Africa's climate tech startup ecosystem should be booming by now. Because everyone in the world is talking about climate. That's like what we are gyrating towards now. But it's not booming because even though the continent receives billions in climate pledges, only about 3% of that money reaches African startups. So let's actually see what you're talking about when we say missed opportunity, right? Africa has over 150 solar mini-grid startups capable of electrifying rural communities, but the World Bank often funds large-scale foreign EPC contractors instead. That's a loss for startups, and that means that a lot of communities, especially those in the grassroots, would still remain without electricity.
Another missed opportunities in the climate financing is that of agri-tech and climate smart farming. Local innovators are creating AI crop prediction tools, drought-resistant seed labs, and irrigation tech. But whenever you ask for funding, most climate agricultural funds, they flow to European implementation partners. The same thing applies to water security. Africa loses billions to water stress yearly. Local innovators have solutions: IoT water meters, drought detection systems, smart boreholes. But see, whenever you see tenders here, they go to foreign engineering firms. So what's the whole essence? Well, from my own point of view, though, the biggest missed opportunity of all is that of the carbon market. African companies should be the one leading carbon credit trading. We own the forest, the mangroves, the peatlands, but it's surprising that the global firms and brokers dominate the trade. They take huge fees. Africa generates the credit, others generate the profit. It's an irony, and it beats imagination, if you ask me.
I mean, let me bring something to our listeners' imagination. Let me bring this into a more realistic concept. I was reading a tweet about a Kenyan founder, a female Kenyan founder. She built a small solar home system startup in Kisumu, and she was tweeting that they say there is $100 billion in climate finance. This is just like sum up her tweet. But for African startups, it's invisible money, right? She said she applied for a $1 million climate grant, but she was told that she needed a $68,000 environmental impact assessment, a $25,000 audit framework, a global partner, and a feasibility study from an approved European firm. So she raised $300,000, built 2,000 solar homes, created over 40 jobs, but the grant still went to a foreign contractor who built a better feasibility study, basically. So it's more like the person won the grant by building a feasibility study for African and European country that is not even based in Africa, right? With the study, they got the grant without a project, without impact, without a report, without electrification. They got the grant, and this story isn't unique. You see it across Lagos, Nairobi, Abidjan, Kigali. Climate entrepreneurs are building real solutions while foreign contractors build reports about those solutions. And that's why this conversation is so important, because we can't talk about green energy, we can't talk about Africa transitioning to green energy if its innovators remain underfunded.
Now let's look at the promise and the politics. Okay, like Hawa said, we see innovators who build real life solutions, who provide opportunities, create employment, yet they lose their grants to those that only do the feasibility study, that only come up with a report and very beautiful, aesthetically looking PowerPoint slides. Okay, solar farms, wind corridors. The reason why this particular segment of this conversation is important, I'm talking about the promise and the politics. Why it is important is that part of Africa's climate finance ecosystem, that is renewable energy, is always misunderstood a lot. Okay, solar farms, wind corridors, hydro expansion, these are the poster children of climate funding. Yeah, whenever you're talking about climate funding, the first thing you see people gear up to be the solar farms, the hydro expansion. So every year, global institutions announce billions for Africa's clean energy transition. But when you zoom in, a different truth appears. Massive project doesn't always translate to local benefit, and sometimes they even create new problems. Let's take solar park, for example. When a European Development Bank funds a 200 million solar project in Africa, here's what the headline says. Thank God, this is my niche here. You hear them say, Europe invests in Africa's energy access. But this is what the fine print would reveal. Turbines imported, panels imported, software imported, engineers flown in, maintenance handled abroad, monitoring done in Europe. And the local workforce, you ask me, often hired only for clearing of land, laying foundation, or probably used as security to monitor the materials imported in, for the whole project. And the saddest part is that once the solar farms are completed, African governments are often charged annual maintenance fees worth millions of dollars, which means Africa becomes dependent on foreign service contracts just to keep African renewable projects running. Yes, we have renewable energy. Well, we do not have renewable skills. They take the money, yet we still pay them. It's more or less like a transaction. Yet they are painting it, they're publicizing it in form of a branding, like a donation. It's more or less like a PR thing where they will tell us, they're donating certain amount of money. But in the real sense, they are taking their money through annual maintenance fees, through import, through, excessive taxation to bring in many of these materials.
I mean, it's so sad. And this is across every aspect of, climate discussions in Africa. You see it in the mini grid, in reforestation, right? Where it's obvious that there's the vast land, the vast forest, right? But the conversations become extremely delicate, right? Because tens of thousands of hectares have been earmarked for carbon offset forest projects funded by Western governments and corporations trying to reduce their emission. But there's a hidden story. Some of these forests are being built on land that local communities rely on, right? And you see it in so many parts of Africa: Kenya, Tanzania, Mozambique, Cameroon, even Nigeria, right? Communities have quietly reported losing grazing land because of reforestation projects, right? It's the same for carbon, which is the new gold, right? Where, some scholars are calling it the green grabbing, right? Which is the appropriation of African land for environmental purposes funded by foreign money. And it's not colonialism in the traditional sense, but a new, more sophisticated version where ownership is not fully taken, but control is, absolutely given to the Western government, right? And you see that these communities, these locals, they really receive a fair share of the money generated by these forests, right? Carbon credits are sold to companies abroad. Carbon brokers earn fees, but the villagers who protect the forest, they receive token payments, if at all they receive anything.
I mean, this is why activist says that Africa supplies the carbon, other supplies the bank account. And, still talking about carbon market. On paper, carbon credit could be Africa's economic breakthrough. We hold 20% of the world's reforestation potential. We own the Congo Basin, which is the Earth's second largest rainforest. We have massive peatland in the Democratic Republic of Congo, even though I don't want to say Democratic Republic of Congo. They chased Nigeria out of the World Cup qualifiers, though the Super Eagles were awful. They played rubbish, so big win to them. There's also the vast mangroves across West Africa. Africa should be earning billions annually with all these resources that we have. But in reality, Africa captured less than 3% of global carbon credit revenue. Why? Because the global carbon markets are dominated by foreign verifiers, foreign brokers, foreign registries, foreign trading platforms. But when African governments try to negotiate for a larger cut, they are told, oh, they are the one bringing the capital and the expertise. Yet, the actual expertise, the knowledge of how local ecosystem function, the knowledge of how they can design and make it work for Africans, it's the local ecosystem function. That's the actual expertise. They are the ones that live in African communities. So let's now break it down clearly. Who generate the carbon? Africans. Or let me say Africa as a continent. Who verifies the carbon? Of course, Europe and North America. Who sells the carbon? International brokers. Who buys the carbon? Corporations in the global north. But let me ask you, who receives the smallest percentage from the carbon money? Definitely Africa. Now, make it make sense. How does that make sense to the global population?
I mean, it doesn't make sense at all, right? So we must ask ourselves, are Africa's climate funds helping Africans, or they're just helping the global systems look good while maintaining control? And if Africa has been seen to be the least responsible for global warming, why are we positioned at the bottom of the climate value chain? We need to ask ourselves, both African as a people, its government, because if Africa doesn't control its climate agenda, someone else will, right? And that's where the whole climate sovereignty comes in. Now, Mbarak, we've talked about policies, we've talked about billions of dollars coming into the country, we've talked about, the impact of foreign contractors and the controversies around climate sectors like forests and carbon credits. Well, let's switch away from the blame game now, because this conversation is really not about blaming anyone, right? We want to be looking at what the future looks like for an African-centered climate environment. And when we talk about this, we are talking about a claiming agency. To imagine a future where Africa isn't just climate recipient like we mentioned earlier, or a climate victim, but a climate powerhouse, one that designs solutions, builds the tech, and captures value. And we have to be honest, we as African has always been known as, people, or as a continent that doesn't need pity. What we need is power, right? Power over the projects, power over the funding, power over the data, over the land, and even over the value chain. And I believe we will have that power. That's what climate sovereignty will mean.
Now, like you rightly said, this is not a blame game. We are only looking for solutions. And of course, we must find one. Okay. In my own opinion, how does Africa tend to climb up the value chain and not be at the lower bottom? Because when you're at the lower bottom, you get the least of the food. Of course, that's basic biology. But I think Africa must start manufacturing. Yeah. We need to build our local climate value chain. And we can only build our local climate value chain when we start manufacturing at least some of the components we use. We import solar panels. Let's build assembly plants. True. Turbine fabrication hubs can also spring up in Africa. Battery recycling facilities. How many of them do we have? Wow. Now we are seeing EVs like the hottest thing in the market now. What stops us from having local EV manufacturing clusters, local carbon measurement technology? I mean, not everything. Yeah, we might not have everything at once, but let's start with something. Even capturing 20% of the renewable manufacturing value chain will be transformative. I mean, imagine having 20% of the value chain. That's something huge. Imagine Lagos, Kigali, Addis Ababa, or Nairobi as a solar assembly capital. Or imagine Dakar or Abidjan, producing wind turbine blades. Or imagine African engineers designing their own inverters and software. These are not fantasies. These are policy choices that would shape the continent, that would upscale us, and also make sure that, yes, we are not just dependent, we are not just receiving the penny, we are not just getting hands down from international partners. We are partners in progress, not partners in getting peanuts from the climate funds. So Africa needs to do better. We need to increase our own value chain by becoming a manufacturer, not just an importer.
Absolutely, I agree with you. And for that to happen, right, African founders must get access. They need access. Not just some paperwork or some news headlines that don't actually make it to reality. They need access to African-focused climate accelerators, local climate venture funds, Pan-African startup procurement policies, even sovereign green investment banks. Because, yeah, the innovators exist, but we've seen that they just don't have the capital, right? A Kenyan founder once said that he's not really asking for handouts, he's asking for the chance to compete. Right. And that is basically what the situation is like. They don't have the fair ground to actually compete against global investors or global innovators now. Imagine if even 10% of Africa's climate money went into African created solutions. Imagine the jobs, the local jobs that could be created, the tech spillovers, the homegrown and very relatable innovations that would come up. All of this would not happen if access is not given to African startups.
Yeah, I quite agree. Yeah. Another thing I believe would help Africa as a continent is fixing the carbon market on African terms. You see, unfortunately, African leaders do not know or do not understand, or probably they do know, or they are too lackadaisical or not too ambitious to pursue them. Maybe that's why we're having some of these problems that are in tech right now. And the reality has always been that the carbon market has never been favorable for Africa as a continent. The negotiation deals, it has always been about the international partners. But because whenever African leaders hear certain amount of money, huge amount of money, they do not care about the paperwork. They are more fixated about, it's their government that brought in certain deal. Whereas they do not really look at the loopholes and fix the carbon market based on the demands and terms of Africa as a continent. Africa should be setting the rules, not just supplying the trees. Okay, that means that we are developing carbon registries. Okay, that means Africa has to be the one to develop carbon registries. Africa has to be the one verifying the whole process. So that means we need the Africa verification system. That means we need African pricing frameworks. We need the community-centered carbon protocols. So if Africa can negotiate the carbon market based on its own terms, Africa can control the carbon market. It can control its climate revenue. Look at Kenya's new 2025 carbon market localization bill, which mandates a minimum of 38% revenue share for communities. 38%. I mean, if you ask me, that's a bold step. It needs to go continent-wide. It needs to go beyond Kenya alone. South Africa needs to adopt strategy like that. Nigeria to do the same. Cameroon, Cote d'Ivoire. We need to negotiate that. The revenue share, at least minimum of 38%, go to communities. That way, we are not impoverishing all the communities where these projects are happening. We're not putting people, we're not just employing securities just to watch over the equipment bought. So Africa needs to negotiate its own carbon market, Awa.
I mean, the zeal at which you're talking about it. I mean, so listeners, you can see that this is really something affecting us, and we would like to see solutions to government, to policymakers listening today. Please, these solutions that we're bringing out aren't just something we are talking from the top of our head. It's based on reality of what we've experienced, of what we've seen work, that is actually working right now, and we believe can work moving forward, right? Another thing to add to what you said back is that Africa needs to prioritize communities, not just corporations. They need to prioritize, they need to understand that there are local homegrown skills needed, for climate solutions. Take, for example, the woman who gathers firewood, or the farmer who was born into the profession of farming. All his life, he has understood, he knows when it's going to be a great yield. He knows what kind of pest is eating his crops without even going to school. Or take a look at the pastoralist who understands biodiversity. These are Africa's climate first responders, and it's too sad, right, to just reduce them to cheap labor when the foreign investors come in to actually do the large work. They should not be the last to benefit, right? Community-led climate governance must become the norm, because if Africa's most vulnerable people don't benefit, then we can just say that climate financing has failed.
I mean, that's just the whole essence. If the locals cannot benefit, it's safe to say that climate financing has failed, truly. And lastly, on the solution from my own end, I don't know if I will still have any, but I think Africans or African leaders need to rewrite relationship with global climate partners. Okay? It is called partners for a reason. Partnership should not translate to dependency. Yes. I think in biology, there's something called symbiosis and commensalism. Yeah. The relationship should be symbiotic. We should both gain something, not dependency. Okay, partnership should mean co-ownership. That means that African government needs to negotiate harder. They need to refuse extractive conditionalities. Many of the climate contracts that we see have a very tough extractive conditionalities in them. We need to insist on local procurement clauses. I keep saying, I'm very sure a lot of people will be thinking, why is Mubarak emphasizing on negotiation? That's because that's where things can be changed. We need to ensure that we insist on local procurement clauses, demand technology transfer in every deal. It is when, of course, there are some innovations that Africans don't even have access to it yet. They're not accessible to it yet. But whenever deals are made, we need to always infuse local technology transfer in every of these deals. It is when foreign expatriate comes and they have technology transfer in the conditions of the contract. That is when locals can gain knowledge. So imagine, China or one of our international partners are trying to, install something here, and there is technology transfer. And of course, that has to cut across about 100 locals. That means if there's a repeat of such deal, Nigeria does not need foreign expatriate to come do the installation any longer. Automatically, those that have been taught will take over the reign. That means we are keeping our money in our system. That strengthens our currency. It strengthens our economy. All these things are intertwined. We also need to reject climate loan disguised as help. If I continue like this, it should, I don't know, I think I'm being vulnerable to this conversation, because it feels, whenever I look at it deeply, I feel like African leaders are not doing enough. So on that note, I would say that Africa must become a co-author of global climate policy and not a footnote. We should not just be tossed aside or placed at the bottom of the ladder. Just say, after everything has been decided, we'll just pass the memo to Africa. It should never be.
That's so profound. Mubarak, you've basically said it all. And I think our government, like you said, our government are not doing enough because they are the ones who've placed in the forefront to carry out these negotiations for us, to help us to get, benefits from any kind of partnerships or business deals they're doing with the foreign economy, right? And unfortunately, we don't see them doing justice to that responsibility. Hopefully, some of them get to listen to this and, just take the right steps. I mean, the more the problems you have, the more the solutions you need to come up with. So we could spend the rest of 1 hour talking about solutions because the problems are deep and intertwined. But I guess we'll be stopping there now so that we can move on with the conversation. And next up is the trending investment news because, we always have to bring that to you. So let's get into what we're actually talking about, right? Which is the largest, or should I say the biggest, climate and green investment stories shaping Africa this week. Firstly, the Africa Development Bank has announced $1.2 billion green industrialization fund. But I'm scared, right? Because this is a huge sum, but based on the conversation that we've been having, I'm not too excited. I mean, will that money actually get to where it's supposed to? But yeah, we can hold the government accountable because there has been an announcement. The African Development Bank has launched a new climate industrialization fund aimed at boosting local solar panel assembly and EV component manufacturing across Nigeria, Rwanda, Kenya, and Morocco. So for the citizens of these countries I've mentioned, the Nigerians, the Rwandans, Kenyans, and Moroccans, please hold your government accountable. Try to monitor these funds to see if they're actually being utilized correctly. But do you want to pyramid?
Also, Ghana has also launched a green fund program for diasporans, and now that it is Ghana diasporans that are involved in this particular bond program, probably there will be a high level of control by the government, and there will be a high level of control that will benefit Ghanaians instead of the corporations and the agreements that we used to have. And this bond program is like a 500 million bond which invite diaspora investors, to co-fund reforestation, solar mini grids, and climate smart farming. I think one thing people need to know about this particular program is that early uptake is very strong, and it means that if you buy into this whole idea at the earliest stage, there are potentials that you would make your profit, and it looks like a great one for Ghana. And also, Nigeria Green Hydrogen Hub signs MOU with European Union Consortium. Although I still have my reservation with this particular project. Reason is because debate about local procurement is already eating up. There are already conversations about how do we do procurement and every other thing. It is already giving me reservations about this project. But the project has about a proposed $3.2 billion green hydrogen facility, which is to be sited in Bauchi State. It is already entering its feasibility stage. But like I said earlier, we're already seeing heated debate about local procurement, who's going to bring in the materials, who's going to do this, who's going to do that. But hopefully, I believe Nigerian government would be able to, fine-tune a deal that will favor the country, not just about the numbers, favor the country's local, the community, the Bauchi resident, where the project will be sited here. How will they benefit from it? How will it not harm them? Because eventually you realize that when many of these things happen, in turn hurts the people, the locals there. So I'm hoping that the Nigerian government, would negotiate a better deal on this one.
And lastly, on the investment plans is coming from South Africa. And South Africa has just secured an additional $1.1 billion in jet fee disbursement. And, just like fears, it's been confirmed that just about 74% of these disbursements remain loan-based, and this has begun to fuel ongoing debates over climate debt and sovereignty. Like we're still just getting loans to remain in the same problem, basically. So we're going to round up this segment for the trending investment news and, just moving on. So I guess the importance of these conversations is for anyone listening, especially if you're an investor, a policymaker, or you're actually in the business of climate, to look at these news, to look at these problems, to look at these solutions, to actually invite them into what you do, to make, to move us from what we are now to a new era of climate agency. Because when you strip away the numbers and pledges, we are left with a simple truth. And that truth is that Africa is not powerless, or we must become purposeful. Right? We must see that climate finance is not charity. It's not a favor. It's an investment, right? And for investment, there needs to be profit. For profit, there needs to be negotiation. Climate finance is also geopolitics, and Africans must show up prepared all the time, because no one will actually protect Africa's climate interests more fiercely than Africans themselves.
And whether you're working in sustainability, tech, policy, or community organizing, yes, you are part of this story as well. Please, your voice matters. Don't leave it to Invest Africa Group alone to do the voicing. Join us. Make use of the hashtag Invest Africa Group podcast. Most importantly for this particular episode, let's speak out. Okay, your voice matters, your innovation matters, your courage matters. So whether you're listening from Nairobi, Abuja, Johannesburg, Kigali, Lagos, or you're listening from the diaspora, know this: Africa's climate future is very bright, but it is only dependent on if Africa leads it. So, guys, that has been the Invest Africa Group podcast. Today's conversation has been on climate cash. Who is really benefiting from Africa's climate fund? I want to believe you enjoyed yourself. I want to believe you learned a lot from this particular episode. Until next time, stay informed, stay inspired, and stay invested in Africa's future. My name remains Mubarak Abibal, and I'm signing out now. Bye-bye.
Anamawa Adebdite, thanks for listening. Bye.